This is wild fennel. It's originally from around the Mediterranean, but it's naturalised in the UK and very common now. It can grow in really huge patches. You'll find it along roadsides and waste grounds, especially within around 5 miles of the coast, but it can also be found inland. So don't expect to find the fennel bulbs that you can buy in the shops. It's from the same plant, but they are cultivated varieties like the Florence fennel. The main identifier for wild fennel is the smell. It's got an unmistakable strong aroma of aniseed or anise, and that comes from all parts of the plant. Fennel is another member of the carrot or Apiaceae family, and if you look at the dead growth from last year, you can see what were the umbel flower heads at the top. As I've said in previous videos, you've got to be very careful of the Apiaceae family. There are some deadly members, but the strong aniseed smell is quite a good way to distinguish it from any of the deadly members of that family. So this time of year we're picking the young leaf fronds, which have a really strong, lovely aniseed flavour. If you like aniseed, that is. It is one that splits opinion quite a lot, but I love it. And this time of year the stems are still quite succulent and they're good to eat as well as a vegetable. A bit later in the year, in the summer, these will go tough and woody. But now, yeah, you can eat them in pretty much the same way as you would the cultivated fennel bulbs. Its flavour works well for sweet or savoury dishes. You can use it as a cooking herb for fish, or you can make it into a puree. Its flavour pairs really well with apple. It's a very versatile herb. I use it quite a lot for making tea, especially mixed with mint for an after meal tea. It aids with digestion. Later on in the year we'll look at the pollen and then the seeds of wild fennel, which in my opinion are the best edible uses of the plant. The leaves of fennel are feather-like and the stems are smooth and hairless. The leaf stems are attached by a sheath, but really the main identifier is the smell. These little fronds here that are still closed up and are bright green, these have got a really strong aniseed flavour and they're really sweet. And the stems, when they're still nice and green and flexible, those are the best ones for using as a vegetable. This is greater reedmace, Typha latifolia. If you're from the States, you'll probably know it as cattails. So it's a plant that likes to grow in damp conditions, so along ponds, rivers, any sort of wetlands. This time of year, we're looking to harvest the young shoots. Now you may need wellies to do this, but I'm just going to be looking for the ones around the edge. They are edible raw, but you don't want to eat them raw when they're in areas that may be polluted or anywhere near towns or farmland. In the UK, that is pretty much everywhere, so I only usually eat them cooked. You see they've got a nice round profile and they look kind of like a leek when you cut through them. You'll need to peel away the outer layers and just eat the middle bit. You do have to be aware of yellow flag irises because they grow in similar conditions and they're toxic, but they'll be much flatter in profile, not as round, so more like that. There we go, that one there is about perfect. You want to cut it as close to the base as possible so it's still white, and it should still be quite soft as well. If the flower spikes started to develop, then it will be really solid and woody in the middle, and that'll be pretty much inedible. You see, they really do look like a leek. I'll use them in pretty much the same way as a leek, just slice them up really thinly, use them in stir fries or anything like that really. Yeah, very abundant food source that for some reason we don't really use in the UK. It also really helps to identify the plant by looking around the base of last season's growth. So all of these with the seed heads on is last season's flowering spikes. And before they burst open like this, they look kind of like really small compact cigars, and then they just get this fluffy mass of seed heads on. So just find these, look at the base in mid to late spring, and you'll see the fresh growth near the base of it there. So this plant is kind of known as the supermarket of the wild because it produces edible parts all year round. I'll go into more detail later in the year, but this time of year it's the shoots. The plant has also got some good bushcraft uses. The woody stems can be used as a spindle for fire by friction, and the fluffy seeds make good tinder. So if you're in a survival situation and you find a really big patch of these, you know that they can help save you because providing you food all year, and they can help you make fire. This is herb Robert, Geranium robertianum, low growing edible herb that's native to the UK and most of Europe. So it'll grow pretty much anywhere along pathways, hedgerows, most probably in your garden if you let wildflowers grow there, and it grows in deciduous woodland. Herb Robert has a long season, but I find it most abundant around May or June. So it tastes very similar to coriander, and I use it as a herb in replacement of coriander. So I know a lot of people don't like coriander, so if you don't like that, then there's a good chance you won't like herb Robert either. There are a few similar looking geraniums, but none of them are toxic. Its flowers are pink and have 5 petals. The flowers usually appear from April all the way through to around October. Its stems are branching and they are covered in really fine hairs. So the stems can either be red or green. Usually the more exposed they are to sunlight, the redder they are. These ones are in quite a good amount of shade, so the stems are green. The leaves are palmately divided, which means they spread from a central point. So that's the central point there, and then the leaves spread out from that. The leaves can turn red, especially during a dry spell, and if you crush the leaves, you'll get a coriander smell. Here's one that's a bit more out in the open. You see the stems are red and the leaves are starting to turn red as well. In May you can pick ash keys, which are the seed pods of the ash tree. Now you want to get to them as early in the season as possible, when they're like this, light green and immature, and they're quite soft. Once they start going a bit brown and firm, they won't be good anymore. So they are edible, but they're very tough and bitter as they are. You want to either pickle or ferment them. So I usually pickle some of these every year, and I boil them and then strain them and boil them again in fresh water just to remove some of the bitterness, and then pickle them in a liquor of vinegar, sugar and some spices, and they taste kind of like capers. The ash tree is a member of the olive family, just like the lilac that I showed in the last video. It's native to the UK and very common. Their leaves grow in an opposite arrangement, so you can see here 2 leaves growing from opposite sides of the stem, and they're compound leaves, so each leaf is made up of many leaflets. If there are still any buds left unopened, you'll see they're opposite there, and they're matte black, which is a good sign of ash. Also, the branches of ash curve up at the ends like a chandelier. These are Oxeye daisy. You'll find them on roadsides, waste grounds and in meadows. They're native to the UK and very common. It flowers from May throughout the summer. There's 1 flower per stem, and the flowers look very similar to common daisy. They're just bigger. They're usually about 5 centimeters across. The basal leaves are more rounded and they're bluntly toothed. The stem leaves are narrower, but they're also bluntly toothed. And the leaves sort of spiral up and around the stem. And the leaves get smaller the further up the stem you go. So at the top they're really small. The leaves can be used as a salad green, or they can just be added into soups. They've got a taste a bit similar to carrot. The flowers are traditionally used for a tea, mixed with a bit of honey. They're good for soothing a sore throat. My favourite use for them is to dip them in tempura batter and then fry them. Common daisies are edible too. Got their little spoon-shaped leaves, and the flowers are both edible. They don't really have much of a flavour, but they're okay just sort of added into salads with other greens. The name daisy comes from the shortening of day's eye, because the flowers open in the morning and then close again at night. This is horseradish, best known for its roots that you can harvest in late autumn and winter. But my favourite use of the plant is the edible leaves. These are one of my favourite greens. You can use them like cabbage. They've got a nice peppery flavour. I most often use them in stir fries, just shredded and thrown in for the last few minutes of cooking. But you don't want to overcook these, because they'll lose their flavour, so just a quick saute. Horseradish grows on roadsides and waste grounds. It's not native to the UK, but it's very common. It's more common near the coast in the UK, but you can also find it inland It's usually found in quite big patches. Horseradish from the Brassica or mustard family. All members of this family are edible, so it's a good one to know for foragers. Horseradish leaves are long and narrow, and they've got a crinkly texture. They've got a wavy margin, and the margins are bluntly toothed. A good ID feature for horseradish is that the leaves grow almost vertically up straight from the root, which is just below the surface. And another good feature is the smell. If you crush the leaves, you'll get the horseradish smell. If you've ever had horseradish sauce, you'll instantly recognise the smell. But you actually get a stronger smell if you break off a stem right from the base and smell it. There's a really strong horseradish smell. The only thing you'll really mistake these for are narrow-leaved dock, which are edible anyway. So horseradish leaves are a lot lighter green and a more vibrant colour than dock. And with dock leaves, if you look at the margin, as I said, horseradish is bluntly toothed, whereas dock has an entire margin or no teeth. And also the leaves growing vertically upwards, and the horseradish smell should make it quite clear that you've got horseradish over dock. The younger, lighter green leaves are the best. Yeah, that's a nice one there. This is a burdock. As you can see, they get pretty big, and they do even get quite a bit bigger than this. So the leaves are edible. I wouldn't particularly class them as a good edible, but the younger ones are okay. They can be a little bit bitter, but the bigger leaves can still be used. You can use these to wrap your food up in and use them to cook in, a bit like banana leaves, and it means when you go camping, you don't have to take tin foil. The reason I'm including this plant there is because this time of year is a good time to learn to identify the plant and take note of where it's growing, and then later in the year you can come back and harvest the huge edible root, although you do need permission to dig it up if it's not on your own land. As you can see, these leaves, they can get pretty huge. There's not many, at least native species in the UK that get leaves this big. So that alone is a pretty good identifier for burdock. The leaves are roughly heart-shaped, like cordate at the base. And the veins fork before they meet the margin, and the margin is wavy. The underneath of the leaf is white and has a downy fur. These stems are edible too. On more mature plants they can get a bit tough and stringy, but these younger, fresher stems can be eaten in much the same way as thistle stems. It's a good idea to peel them first. You can see they look a little bit like rhubarb stems, where they're greener at the top and then go a bit red at the base.